Right, welcome everyone to our first GFA Academy Masterclass on policy. We are very excited to be here today with so many signups. We have had nearly 600 people signing up for this masterclass, so we are very intrigued and very happy to have you here. I want to make sure you all know that this session will be recorded and uploaded on our website afterwards. Throughout the session, you can ask questions in the Q&A. There'll be a large Q&A in the end. To start with, my name is Christina. I work as Head of Innovation and Development here at GFA and is hosting all of these masterclasses. And I'm very excited to be here today with you. Let me know where you're from in the chat, and again, feel free to ask any questions. But most importantly, I have Maria-Louisa here, my colleague, who is our Publicity Affairs Director. So over to you.
All right, thank you, Christina, and a warm welcome to everyone from me as well. Textiles was listed as one of the priority product categories for the first time in a European Commission staff working document from the 3rd of March 2019. And you may wonder, why is this important, right? There are so many staff working documents. Well, first of all, to me, it's a very important one because it was actually part of the interview I had to do to get this job. So only for that, I will ask you to remember that. But secondly, and most importantly for all of you here today, it's important because it marked a real turning point, the beginning of textiles in the EU agenda. Those of you who, like me, were already in this sector back then know well how the rest of the story goes. So, December 2019, a new European Commission led by President Ursula von der Leyen. The European Green Deal came afterwards, introducing the first ever European climate law. To reach that law's goal, a new circular economy action plan was introduced by the still Commissioner for the Environment, Virginijus Sinkevicius. And one of the priority sectors in that circular economy action plan was, you guessed it, textiles. It announced an EU textile strategy, but also other cross-cutting actions impacting the sector. Okay, fast forward to today, 21st of March 2024. This is the situation. Here you can basically see all the files currently impacting textiles only at the EU level. They are divided into each of the 5 priority areas of our flagship publication at Global Fashion Agenda, so the Fashion CEO Agenda. You can actually download it by clicking on the link that my colleagues are popping in the chat right now. And I will leave it to our speakers to dive deeper into all of these policies. But the point I want to make here is that textiles-related legislation really touches upon all aspects. It really goes from design all the way to reuse and recycling. The sector went from being almost completely unregulated to a real legislative tsunami. And to help us unpack this shift, we have lined up an excellent panel that I now have the pleasure to introduce. So we have with us Antonio de Sousa Maia, Legal Policy Officer for the European Commission, Director General for Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship and SMEs. Prior to joining DG GROW to work on the implementation of the EU textile strategy, Antonio worked, amongst others, as a lawyer, a parliamentary advisor, and for the Portuguese government. Welcome, Antonio. Then next we have Pernilla Hountin, Group Head of Public Affairs with H&M Group. And after many years in the company in various roles, Pernilla built the public affairs function 4 years ago. H&M Group was one of the first fashion brands to work actively on public affairs for many years now. Great to have you here with us, Pernilla. And last but certainly not least, we have Jérôme Perrault, Secretary General of FESI, the Federation of the European Sporting Goods Industry. Jérôme started his journey with FASY back in 2007. So again, someone with great experience here. And over time, he has taken on several roles, such as board member of the European Commission European Week of Sports Advisory Group. I have personally also had the pleasure to work together with Jérôme in the framework of the Policy Hub, of which FASY is a founding partner together with GFA and the recently rebranded Cascale, previously known as the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. So thanks for being here with us. Antonio, let's start with you. Take us back in time. How come textiles came later in the EU priorities than many other sectors like plastics? And why in 2019? What was the intention from the European Commission back then? Over to you, Antonio.
Hello, Maria. Hello, everybody. So glad to be here. Well, I would say, if I may, that the Commission is just in time. We're not late. We're just in time. So I believe it's important to stress that the environmental impact of sectors like plastics, transport, the energy sector, they've been known for quite some time. And consequently, they've been the focus of more political and societal attention. So also the Commission has paid more attention to it in the past. But around 2015, I would say, the exponential production of textile products and especially apparel became more apparent. Various studies started to emerge, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, other studies, and scientific evidence started to demonstrate the size of the ever-growing environmental impact of the sector, and at the same time that the rates of recycling were very stable, although production was going up very, very significantly. So I think when this commission, so the present commission, took office, and as you showed in the slide, it immediately took action. It immediately set out to increase ambition in environmental policies, and so immediately adopted the Green Deal communication in December 2019, as you said, and textiles was immediately listed as a resource intensive sector in need of a circular economy action plan. So the idea behind these circular economy action plans, as you mentioned, is to have a sustainable product policy from green and lasting design and manufacturing to the end of life management, so all the life cycle, and to ensure a steady and economically viable production of secondary raw materials. And all of this very linked to the digital transition, so transitioning, making use of all the new technologies. So based on this Green Deal, this idea gave rise to a new industrial strategy and a revised circular economy action plan, which came in March 2020, as you also mentioned. So I think the Commission's intention is quite clear. The Green Deal, the circular economy plan, the new industrial strategy really encapsulate the new growth strategy for Europe and that the Commission puts forward. So a digitalized economy to ensure that products are greener, circular from design to end of life management, and then back again as recycled feedstock. So a closed loop, never-ending closed loop. The idea being that to introduce new rules, new standards, ambitious, but technically and economically viable, and with particular care for SMEs. We know the composition of the textile sector, so we're very, very careful about that. So the idea here is really for Europe to set the stage, lead by example, become the trend and the standard setter, and then reap the environmental, but also I have to say the economic and social benefits of this new economy of higher value added, higher skilled, better paying jobs, rebuilding our industrial capacity. So this is really what the Commission is after and what we aim for. So when the textile strategy came in March 2022, it put in place the specific actions to make this happen for textiles. And I'll get to that in a minute. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Antonio. Yes, indeed, we will go deeper into those topics in the next section. But now I would love to hear also from Jérôme. So what was the industry standpoint back then in 2019? How did you start positioning FASY for what was coming?
Thank you, Maria Luisa, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone, depending on where you are. I would say, so FASY being the representative for the sporting goods industry in Brussels already since the 60s, we were anticipating the developments that were coming ahead. We were involved in the past in the Garment Initiative, and we were involved in the Circular Economy Action Plan and Plastic Strategy. And when we saw what was the Circular Action Plan 2.0 coming with textiles being very high on the agenda and the textile strategy coming over, we understood that our sector and all sectors related to clothing textiles would move from an unregulated sector to a regulated sector, and would basically follow what other sectors had seen, like the toys industry or the cosmetics industry, for example. We were not aware of that there were so many regulatory proposals going to happen at the same time and in such a relatively short time frame. I know people will think that 4 years is a very long time, but to us it felt like 3 months, because we had to work on so many different initiatives at the same time. But I would say that there was a very mixed feeling and approach in our membership. You have to understand that our members are very diverse. We have very big companies like Nike, Adidas, Puma, but we also have SMEs, we have micro enterprises, we have family business, family retail shops in our membership, we have national federations and so on, and we have very diverse products. We have companies that are working on hard goods like skis, others that are working on personal protective equipment like helmets, and others that are working on a mix of all these products and clothing, apparel, outdoor gear, outdoor equipment. So very diverse type of products, very diverse maturity levels in their sustainability journey. And so a very diverse, I would say, approach in welcoming all these initiatives. So our challenge was to bring everybody up to speed, to help everybody map out their value chains, their supply chains, understand who they have to discuss with and understand, and how they can build traceability and transparency in order to understand ultimately what will be the business implications of all these legislations once they enter into force. And all over this, the main conclusion I would say is that nobody can tackle these things on their own. And I know many people have said this, many people have heard this before, but this was very, very important to us. And this is also why with FASY, we have co-contributed in the development of initiatives such as multi-stakeholder initiatives, I would say, such as the policy hub for accelerating circular policies for apparel and footwear, for example, because not only can brands not do this on their own, they have to work together, but entire sectors cannot do this on their own. And we even have to contact and discuss with stakeholders outside of our sectors. So this was, I would say, the first realization. Be constructive, but also be realistic and pragmatic.
Yes, thank you so much, Jerome, and thanks for bringing in already the collaboration aspect. I'm sure it will also come back again. Pernilla, same question from a company standpoint. How did the public affairs role at a global group look like back in 2019?
Different from today, that's for sure. Absolutely. And it's impressive to hear that the sport industry has been together since the 60s. I didn't know that, Jerome. Impressive. Well, I started to touch upon public affairs 10 years ago within H&M. And in 2019, I was leading the public affairs work half part-time from a sustainability department. So, and at that time, very few companies within our sector had a public affairs person, and even less a function. So I think that is really where it started to pop. And now, if I just go to me, now I have a full team, both central and regional, where we have in key retail markets, key production markets. We are our own public affairs function. I report to the CFO, and that might not be very usual to do that when you work with public affairs. I think it's brilliant because that's also how you can be close to business. And I think it's so important when you work with public affairs to be very close to business. And so it's very different from how we work today than 2019. However, I think that 2019, we did have representation in Brussels, and we might have been one of the first brands from our textile industry to have that. And I think it's also, I mean, for us being a global company, we need also to make sure that we are speaking with one voice across the globe, because it's especially important to do that when we have legislations created in one market in one country affecting other countries. So we really need to be active on the markets that are very important to us. And when I say one voice, what does that mean? What is one voice? Well, for us, it is to be able to share our learnings, our experience, our knowledge about the industry. I think it's important to understand that policymakers knows how to set legislations, and we know how our industry works, and that's the magic combination that really can shape that impactful legislation. And that's what we want, right? To have legislation that create real impact. And in this, and right now, what the EU is doing, it's about real impact within sustainability. So a big difference from how it looked before.
Yes, and that magic combination, I love that. Thank you so much, Pernilla. All right, so it's now time to deep dive into the core of all these policies. And because we saw such a wide range of registered participants here today, we actually wanted to start with a small quiz so that both myself and our speakers can adapt the level accordingly. So you should see a poll popping up in your screens. Amazing, I see everybody is already replying. And the question is, how would you rate your knowledge level of policies impacting textiles? All right, let us give it a few seconds. It's still moving. All right. Okay, yes, we will now show the results so that you can all see them. And well, Antonio, as you see, we have here a very diverse audience, and including 36% of beginners. So taking that into account, I would suggest we actually forget about the technical accurate names, so no ESPR, no CSDDD, and other impossible acronyms. Basically, what are the top 10 concrete policy measures that the EU has in the pipes?
All right, thank you. I actually didn't see the results, but I trust you. I trust you that, and I'll try to keep it simple. So, indeed, there are many policy measures. You had a slide on them. There were quite a number of them. They're all working together for just a few vectors or areas, as you want to call them. So I would rather say what are our main areas of action and what we're trying to achieve. So first and foremost, and there's a legislative piece just for this, I would say eco design. So we are trying to ensure that textile products are eco design. What does this mean? It means that from the design to the manufacturing stage, sustainability and circularity are the guiding principles. So we want products to be long-lived, reusable, recyclable, with a low environmental footprint, free of hazardous substances. Ultimately, we want to also reduce the discarding and the destruction of products. We have specific policies on this, famous or infamous for unsold goods. So this is the idea. Better products, higher quality products, more sustainable products, longer used, and then managed sustainably when they become waste. So this is then another vector, rules on how to properly manage these products when they come to the end of life, properly manage them as waste. So we're setting up a producer finance system called an EPR, an extended producer responsibility system. And the intention here is to secure that the high quality feedstock of secondary raw materials feeds back into the supply chain so that you collect all these textiles at the end of life. They are properly managed, they are properly either sent for reuse or properly recycled, and then these secondary raw materials feed into new products in a closed loop. So this protects the environment and, as I said before, ensures our strategic independence from raw materials, virgin raw materials that come from other jurisdictions, as you know. So the idea the intention is that these EPR systems, the extended producer responsibility systems, then leverage through market forces, because market is a key player here, the research and development needs, so that we have new recycling technologies. I know they're not there yet, especially on chemical recycling. Mechanical recycling also has a certain number of issues. So the hope is all this new economic model that we'll put in place will foster this, will scale up this, and then create this ever-growing closed loop that hopefully in the end will amount for the vast majority of the raw materials that we need. We have financing for this too through Horizon Europe. For the first time, we have a partnership under Horizon Europe just for textiles for the next part of the program, 2025-2027. And then to enable this, to put this on the ground, we have a tool called the Digital Product Passport. This is an enforcement and an information tool, and it's meant to gather all the information about the product, allow for proper enforcement, including at union borders, because I know a lot of people are worried about third country products. They have, if they are placed in the EU market, they have to comply with the same rules, and they will be checked at the border. So there's a real level playing field. And then consumer information. Consumer information is essential. We cannot have greenwashing. We have specific legislation also against this. We are going to harmonize the information given to consumers so that it's clear, that it's easily comparable, also in product labels, to make sure that a consumer gets the right amount of information in an easy way, in a comparable way, they can make proper consumer choices. And then also throughout the use of the product, they can properly take care of the product, make it last longer, and then ultimately dispose it. So the idea here is to set harmonized set of rules. I know it's quite a few, as Jerome said. It's true, but they will be harmonized. So a set of rules that everybody has to abide by, a trusted level playing field for companies to compete upon. The idea is to remove from the market the lowest performing products through performance requirements, as we call them. So we're going to ban from the market those products that are very low quality, very impactful. And for the other products, the rest of the products that are allowed to be put on the market, you'll have a sound, objective metrics that everybody has to comply with to objectively characterize all the products on sale. So these are the information requirements, and this is the level playing field upon which everybody needs to act and to compete. We have also other policies, not only regulatory, to shore up this, to make this a reality on the ground. We have joint actions with stakeholders, for example, on skills. We know the textile sector is characterized by low-skilled workers. We need to upskill them, reskill them, in order to make them key players of this new economy. More complex products are coming. We know this. We have this platform called the Transition Pathway, where we encourage stakeholder commitments to go above and beyond the regulatory minimum. We have campaigns such as the Refashion Now to tell consumers and to persuade consumers to buy more responsibly and more sustainably. So all of this will shore up the efforts of the green companies, the leading green companies, bring more and more consumers to them, create new markets, and hopefully these will be the products of the future. And in terms of the global dimension, we cannot forget that, of course, not only because these rules apply to all over the world, but also because third countries cannot be left behind. So in our trade policy, we are very careful in having policies towards developing these similar local policies that allow for this level of sustainable products. We have legislation on corporate social and environmental sustainability for big corporate groups to disseminate these practices all over the world. So again, the idea really here is to set the stage, lead by example, and make Europe really the leading economy of a greener future. So this is the objective. These are more or less, in a nutshell, the rules. If you want me to get into specifics, I will later on the various legislative initiatives.
Excellent, Antonio. Extremely clear. Thank you. We will indeed go to the question section at the end. But first, let's help our audience further here, because I am sure that they often hear that X or Y policy has been adopted by the Commission or is in trialogue negotiations or something similar in terms of EU jargon. But concretely, what can we expect from all these policy changes, and when will the first measures be introduced?
That's a tough question. Okay, so the textile strategy, which we mentioned, which is the framework policy document for all of this, determines that the cutoff date, the absolute cutoff date, is 2030. So by 2030, we want everything up and running. But to be honest, we expect that before that, I would say well before that, all the rules will be adopted. The standards will be available because we have to ask for standards, technical standards in some cases for eco design, notably. The transitional periods will have passed. We're going to give suitable transitional periods for companies to adapt, but they will have passed way before 2030, so that all provisions are in force and in application some years before. I can't tell you when. So what happens then? What will a consumer have then? So they will be sure that a textile product on the market, on sale, will have been designed and manufactured to conform with these eco design performance requirements. So this minimum below which any product cannot go. So this will be the minimum. Maybe even a lot of companies, we hope so, will aim higher, and they will be able to convey this in the information they convey to consumers through the digital product passport and the labels. Maybe even applying for the EU eco label, which we're going to revise as well. A producer will have all the information gathered from the supply chain. I know you're weary about this, but we will make it possible. We'll help you make it possible that you will gather all the information to characterize the products, and then all this information will be available to the consumers so that they can make an informed choice when it's time to buy the product. And then they will have also this literature, especially the digital product passport, with very detailed information so they can read while they use the product. So also helping them to better use it in a more sustainable way. The label will also help you take care of the product so they last longer. You use less energy, less water when you wash them. And then finally, hopefully several years in the future, when it's time to discard the products, you will know how to do it. And then waste managers pick the products up, they send them to reuse or they send them to recycling, and then it begins again, over and over again, into a full circuit, a closed loop. So this is what you'll have by, I don't know, 2027, 2038. I cannot tell you a date.
Amazing, Antonio. Yeah, you had the really complicated task of unpacking 5 years of policy in 10 minutes. So well done. You made it sound even simple. So thank you so much for that. That being said, you can ask questions. I see many popping up already. Please use the Q&A. Our panelists will be answering those directly. Also, if you want to go deeper into these policies, feel free to check the EU policy matrix that we at GFA have put together. My colleagues just popped the link in the chat, and this is basically an overview of all the policies impacting textiles at the EU level. We update it every week, so it's your go-to place if you want to see what's the latest status of a given policy. Jérôme, back to you now. What impact does this all have for the sports sector, and what specificities also as compared to fashion?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I'm reading some of the questions, and although many people are saying they're intermediate or beginner, the questions are quite precise. So kudos on that. I think people are more expert than they think. So what impact on the sports sector? Well, I mean, first of all, the impact was trying to understand everything that is coming their way. Like every company individually had to understand what are the implications. How can they gain more knowledge about their value chains, their supply chains, their stakeholders? How will all these individual legislations, first of all, connect to each other, and how can they adapt their businesses to make sure that they comply and or exceed the regulatory expectations? The thing is that, it's important not to rush into it, because many of these legislations are still being prepared or being finalized. So on the one hand, I think it's important to prepare, not to wait that everything arrives. So you should start preparing as a company and as a sector in general. Again, here I would like to point out the relevance of multi-stakeholder initiatives, whether it is for chemical restriction or whether it is for mapping out value chains or supply chains, whether it is for due diligence, and so on and so forth. But it's important to start preparing. It's important to start discussing with peers, but also with your industry federations to understand all these regulatory expectations coming up. I mean, just to name one acronym, the ESPR JRC report that came out recently was more than 250 pages. So not every SME out there in Europe has the chance to read and go through all this and understand how they will have to adapt their businesses. So obviously you also have to work with professionals that can give you some advice on this. What are the main differences between the sporting goods industry and the fashion sector? I would say generally from a volume of product standpoint, we have very, very similar, I would say, interests, concerns, or value chains. So this is also why we work together in platforms like the Policy Hub, for example, or GFA, because from a volume standpoint, many of our products are very similar. I mean, you can put on some Stan Smith shoes and walk around and go to work. By the way, nowadays I can only see people with sneakers at the office, which is good. But a difference that we have is that indeed we also have hard goods manufacturers that are manufacturing skis in Central or Eastern Europe, for example, using very different materials such as aluminium, carbon fiber, wood, wax, and things like that. We have a lot of manufacturers of personal protective equipment, which have obviously very different safety standards, such as CE marking and things like that. So, you know, if you're a manufacturer of climbing ropes or goggles or helmets, there's a whole set of safety criteria that you have to implement as well. And I would say here concretely, this means that in many of these legislative proposals, often personal protective equipment have a very peculiar or specific approach. Sometimes they're even derogated because of all the safety and performance features. So I would say when it comes to high performance products that do need to have a very high performance functionality, such as protecting you against extreme cold, or, you know, swimwear that is including carbon fibers to make you swim much faster. There are differences when we compare this to the fashion sector. But again, those are more, I would say, specific performance-oriented products and also performance-oriented customers when it comes to really the practice of a sport activity at a certain level. For the rest, we do share very similar, I would say, interests, concerns, questions about how to, you know, be better at traceability and transparency in the value chain.
Yes, thanks so much, Jerome, and thanks for bringing again that element of acting together also as an industry. Pernilla, H&M, so 4,702 stores in 76 markets and 56 online markets. How has legislation coming from the EU impacted the way H&M operates?
Yeah, and now you did not even count the production markets, then we're up to 90 plus. So, and they are very important as well.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, I just want to repeat a bit about from my perspective of what Antonio said, that we actually see legislations affecting all the stages of our value chain, from how we produce them, we design them, and how we communicate with our customers on them, how we disclose to our investors, as well as what happens with them after their life. So it's really targeting every aspect of the value chain. And here, I mean, I still, even though you can see that with the 90 plus markets and every aspect of the value chain, I still want to point out one thing, and that is that we often have the same vision as policymakers. We do see legislation as an enabler to positively transform the industry. We do see that. And we see also that we as a company, we've spent 25 years of both time and resources into sustainability. So we see that an increasing requirement on legislations could be an opportunity for us. But also need to say, do we love every aspect of the legislation? Do we see the exact same purpose of everything? No, we don't, because we come from different angles. But I do think that we share the vision of it, and that's also where I think that when I'm talking about that magic, when we come together and really creating it together, that's where things happen. But I think, yeah, I lost track there a bit. But if I go back to how it affects when it's 90 plus, obviously EU is the one who's been the most active, and also have the legislation that affects other markets. So I think that is really to be on top of those legislation, as very much as Jerome says, to understand what's the impact, and is it really creating the impact that we want. So there's a lot of work that we need to connect to business in it. But if I go back to what I wanted to say about the whole using legislations to create a change, I'd say that systemic change can only happen if the legislations are for all. And here I do think that the legislation need to apply to all the companies of all sizes, no matter where they are based, because if they put products on the market in the EU, they should comply with it, and no matter the business model. And I think here it's also important to understand that in the fashion industry, 90% of the companies are SMEs. So if you want to change the industry, we need to have all of us together. Obviously, with SMEs needs to have the appropriate means to support them. Absolutely, but that's really what I mean also with level playing field. So yes, a lot of work digging into it, but also a lot of work to make sure that this can actually create the change that we want.
Yeah, very clear, Pernilla, and thanks so much for bringing in also that global dimension. Indeed, you're a global group, right? And basically, my follow-up question to that would be, how do you also integrate policies coming from other jurisdictions? Because we're talking about the EU now, but there's of course more coming from elsewhere. So is what is coming from the EU aligned with what's coming from other geographies?
No, it's not. I'd say that is a major challenge that we face, and that we also constantly feed back to policymakers. And given that global nature of our value chain and also of our brand footprint, we do face a patchwork of legal requirements. And that patchwork can be quite burdensome and counterproductive. And I think it's very clear that the different parts of the world are linked together, and that the legislative change that is happening in the EU is affecting. And here I'd say that the EU textile strategy is a great example of that, because it will significantly impact the garment manufacturers in non-EU countries. And here it is important also to bring them, to make them aware of it, and to take into account what challenges are they standing in front. So this really means that the EU needs to be aware of that they're affecting a whole global value chain. And there are pros and cons to that. The pros is that that's also a way to raise the value chain, to raise the impact in the whole value chain. And I can just give examples of it to make it a bit more tangible. For example, on a carbon footprint, on renewable energy, there are many production markets that do not have the renewable energy. And we're not saying that then they should have any, should go around it. On the contrary, we are very active in dialogue with those governments to really make sure that there will be renewable energy, that there will be the needs that they have. But we're also in dialogue with the EU there to make sure that the EU can push similar aspects, so we can do it together to raise the whole value chain. And here I need to add here that in the world today there is also a bit a touch of a protectionism here and there, and I think this is also when we see popping legislation here and there, we can sense touches of protectionism. And I'd say that as a global company, we are not in favor of protectionism. Instead, we want to transform the full industry, and that's what we can do. There are opportunities to do that, but we need to work together then, both EU and of course us as a brand in those markets where that is important. I just wanted to go back to the alignment also within the EU member states, because that is a good example of lack of alignment. That we have several member states that are really pushing and developing legislations not in the same pace. So, that is kind of contradicting to the harmonized approach that I'd say that Brussels and EU should stand for. And it's also quite challenging on that.
Thank you so much for bringing that, because indeed we've seen how present this is in the media these days, right? So it's last week actually that the French Parliament, so the Assemblée Nationale, passed a new bill. It's very much at the forefront of media's attention. So I'm talking here about the proposition de loi visant à réduire l'impact environnemental de l'industrie textile. My colleagues will pop it in the chat in a bit, and we thought we'd briefly touch upon it. I'd be first curious to hear via the chat how many of you have heard about this French bill. Please just drop a quick yes and no in the chat, so that yes. All right, yeah, it's what we thought. So I see a few no's as well. Well, very briefly, so that you know what we're talking about. In a nutshell, France came up with a new bill. It suggests a definition of fast fashion, which is something completely new. There's also a new reward penalty system to take into account environmental costs. What else do we have? We have a ban on advertising for fast fashion products and companies, and many other disposals here. So, Pernilla, maybe let's start with you. Can you tell us more about it, as you were speaking about it already, and how H&M's public affairs team is working on this French bill? Thank you.
I think it's a law that sticks out a bit, and it's probably because it's a bit tangible for everyone, so that why it's easy for media to catch up. I think the legislations, if I may say so, Antonio, that you are dealing with are much more complex, and hence media is not that interested, if I may say so. I mean, we're glad that we are in close dialogue with the French legislators about this specific proposal. And there are several legislations coming, I mean, also both from the EU and France and others, touching upon similar aspects. And I want to come back to that we often have a similar vision as policymakers, and here as well. I mean, we believe that any legislation that have the intention and ability to move the needle towards increased circularity for the industry, increased sustainable industry, increased use of sustainable materials, support a shift to renewable energy, those legislations we're all overall positive to. However, to ensure that this specific legislation leads will delivering to what it wants to deliver to, it is important to adopt clear criteria based on science, and also to align with the EU. So I think I want to hold it there. To not dig, it's a legislation that you can talk for 2 hours on. So, yeah.
Absolutely, no, but very much appreciated, because it's extremely recent, and fully understand that we are all still analyzing and working on it. But I really appreciate that you could tell us about it. Jérôme, I know you also work closely with the national federations, including the French one. Would you like to add something here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I agree with the points that Pernilla raised. I think for the time being, we just have the spirit of the law, and I think we can all agree with the spirit of the law and the foreseen, the intended, I would say, objective. However, many of the points still need to be agreed on within decrees. So, you know, what are we talking exactly about when we're talking about ultra fast fashion? Who are we targeting exactly? I would just say, you know, and somebody asked it in the chat, market enforcement in the end is critical. You know, doing legislation is not an end in itself. I mean, afterwards, you need to make sure that you have market enforcement authorities that have the resources to actually enforce these legislations. And unfortunately, I think that many of the national market enforcement authorities and EU market enforcement authorities lack the necessary resources to really apply all these things. I can understand that member states are tempted to go their own way in doing these legislations, you know, for their citizens. However, in the end, who will enforce it? I can see millions and millions of fake or counterfeited products on the EU market, despite the fact that they're just simply illegal. So I really wonder how France on its own will manage to check every single parcel delivery coming to any person. So I just wish and hope that this will concur with its intended objective and not be just another tax that people will ultimately, the end consumer will have to pay, and that will not help, I would say, be the silver bullet solution and put an end to ultra fast fashion or other unforeseen business models that might then use some loopholes. So again, the way we are working with our French Federation is really to make sure to align with all the work, the excellent work that the EU is doing already, and to make sure that ultimately we have 27 member states that are aligned and that are a global enforcement force as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jérôme, for that. And maybe one last thing on this French law. I would personally be very curious to hear from Antonio. I'm guessing it's the case for many of you here as well. How does this align with what's coming from the EU, right? Because this French law is touching upon many aspects that are already part of ongoing EU pieces of legislation. Do companies need to then get ready for both? Is there one that prevails over the other?
Yeah, another tough question. Indeed. Well, it's not the first time, it won't be the last, that member states jump the gun and legislate in a remit where the Commission has already announced the intention to legislate. There you have it. It happens. I would say that we're looking very carefully at these pieces of legislation, notably the French ones and notably the one you mentioned. These pieces of legislation need to conform, first of all, with current EU law, and current EU law is not only secondary law, it's also the treaties. So free movement of goods, for example, issues may come up. We will assess them, specifically this piece of legislation. If it's adopted, we will look at it carefully. We may or may not find them in compliance, and if not, we have infringement procedures at our disposal. It happened before with the trim and logo, for example. This being said, I mean, whether companies should prepare or not, I would say yes, they have to. Do keep an eye on this legislation, take part in the consultation process, which is happening in this case in France, and know that we are working very hard and trying to do it as fast, but also as best as we can to legislate more or less the very same things. And when we do, rest assured that EU legislation supersedes French legislation insofar as they coincide in objective and remit. So indeed, for the moment, do pay attention to French legislation, but also pay attention to what we are doing, and the future would tell what happens to these disparate member state legislations that pop up, whether they are superseded, whether they are complementary. Let's see. But yes, I would have to say to companies, keep an eye.
Great, Antonio. Thank you so much for these very important procedural elements. Let's move to the present very briefly. Time flies, and I would really love to keep as much time as possible for questions at the end. But briefly, let's start maybe with you, Jérôme. What do you like about all the policy elements that we're talking about? What do you not like so much, and where is there room for improvement?
Yeah, I, of course, do not want to offend anyone or any institution. I think those are extremely important yet extremely complicated questions, subjects, I would say, and legislative proposals to be worked on. I know there's a lot of expectations from end consumers, from civil society, from investors, from employees, from brands, from everybody. So it's very difficult to take on these mammoth tasks regarding, I mean, very global and very complex value chains. I would say the strengths in the last 4 or 5 years of legislation, I would say 4 because it took a year to draft all these initial proposals, is first of all the dedication of the policymakers. I mean, they are not hundreds and thousands of people per unit. They are a handful of experts that really need suddenly to work on very complex topics. And I would say, you know, they really did their best to be as compromising as possible and to listen to everyone and to come up with something that would, you know, be more than just a low common denominator, but something progressive and something as pragmatic as possible. Secondly, I think the overall EU decisional making system, while extremely complicated, even for somebody who has been in this for the last 16 years, I still learn something new every day. I did not know about the corrigendum procedure last year. But I think that it is still as transparent as possible, a system that is as transparent as possible. I can see in the consultations, in the expert groups, in everything that you know, everything is open to citizens, to civil society organizations, to lobbyists, to industry representatives. So everybody has a role to play. Everybody is listened to. Some may argue some more than others, but I'll leave that to the world to decide. And ultimately, again, and this is linked to the 2 previous points, is also the spirit of constructivism and compromise. Ultimately, you will always have people that are more or less happy about the end results. You can see it in the due diligence proposal that was very recently adopted, for example. But we're getting there, it's being adopted, and I think the compromised way is very laudable. And this is why I would say the slogan of the European Parliament fits quite nice in there: united in diversity. You just can't make everybody happy, but they are trying. Weaknesses or, you know, improvements, I would say that sometimes too many different departments are trying to do too many things at the same time. So there's a huge workload, first of all, for those preparing the legislation, but also for those digesting them. Sometimes we have very short lead times to respond to very complicated, very long regulatory documents. And so here I would say it's very difficult, even for people who have been working for years and years and years in this, to be up to speed and to be able to really chip into all these aspects. And a second point I would say is about the harmony or the coherence, because many different proposals are sometimes, you know, it can be legally a regulation or a directive or you know, various initiatives, and then the consultation process is sometimes different. Sometimes you have an impact assessment, sometimes not. I will not go into the details, but you always have to readapt and relearn for every piece of legislation, depending on which you know, regulatory basis it has in a treaty and so on. So it's very complex, and I can understand why SMEs or regular citizens shy away from ultimately contributing to developing legislation, because it's so complex even for us to understand. Room for improvement for the future. Here I can only say one thing: harmonization, level playing field. I know we're all saying these words many times, but Europe is in a, we are in a global world. We are 8 billion people. Europe is not an island. And I think it's very important that Europe in itself is united, that the 27 member states work together, use Europe as an asset in order to remain competitive at the global stage and to have a strong role to play in being a benchmark, whether it is legislatively or in other domains, but also do include and work together with the rest of the world, because only together can we tackle global challenges.
Thanks so much, Jerome, and thanks for bringing in also the dedication from policymakers, right? We even have Antonio here with us today in spite of everything that's coming. Thank you so much. Pernilla, same question for you. Tell us.
I honestly think that Jerome nailed it so well that I have very little to add, because it's exactly what he's saying, and I might nail it just because it's worth repeating. And maybe I wanted to take my minutes to explain a bit the level. We talk about level the playing field. What is that? And that means that everyone needs to apply to these legislations, that we're not cutting out one chunk that should not be applied to, because that's, from my perspective, that is how we can raise the whole industry. I can add one, which is the common language in reporting that would provide much greater comparability and benchmarking across brands. That is one thing. And I think, I do think that we are in close dialogue with policymakers. I think, Antonio, you've met us all several times. I still want to emphasize the importance of that we have opportunities to share our learnings and knowledge with you. To really create that impact that we both want. So I think that that's an important one. One that I think we could do, a weakness, if we call it a weakness, is that quite often during these years, we have been needed to play that intermediate role between different EU bodies to ensure policy coherence. And we would prefer to spend that time to clarifying, our positions or sharing our experience. I think it's been quite unique years here that you've been popping all over in the EU, so you've had a hard time to really put it all together. You're getting there, and we've also added a piece of work to that. And then, of course, as we mentioned, the member states, I think when different member states are running ahead, that is problematic for us. And then, exactly as Jerome was saying about the world and the global value chain, that we need to think. We cannot think of EU as an island. We need to think of the whole world. So I think that's splendid. I'll stop there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Pernilla. So many excellent elements in there. Let's jump to the future, right? Because we have elections coming. We saw that in the registered participants, we also have many people from outside of the EU. So we thought maybe we could start with Antonio here, basically explaining us what's going to happen, what's happening in June this year, how does basically this process look like?
Yes, indeed. So looking forward to the election. We know results are sometimes challenging, and but it's all good. It's all good. The elections are there to revalidate the strategies, relaunch the reform drives. It's always good to listen to the people, to what they have to say, and to recalibrate our policies according to the judgment of citizens. It's always a good thing. That being said, I mean, if you're asking me, and I've seen in the chat some in the Q&A some questions about that, and I'll answer it immediately. If you're asking me whether I think the election will make us diverge from the general direction of travel we're heading now, I don't think so. The vast majority of political forces that we also expect shall have a strong majority voice in the future parliament advocate strong environmental policies. There's a general consensus there. It is true that the devil's in the detail. I mean, we need to make sure that the greener future is a future of greater industrial competitiveness and resilience for the European industry. I mean, I keep telling even my environmental colleagues in the commission that you cannot have a green industry without an industry. So things need to be proportionate, things need to be technically economically feasible. That's to be sure. We need to avoid harsh transition periods. At the same time, we cannot move too slow because things are really escalating. The level of production is mounting. At the same time, the levels of recycling is not advancing at all, as I told you. So we need to hit that Goldilocks speed, right? So not too fast, not too slow. We cannot drive industry out of business, but we cannot be slow to the point of irrevocably damaging our planet. So I think what the new commission will do, based on how the new parliament will look like, is to take a look at the speed gauge as it is now, and probably maybe even speed some measures up, but probably slow some others down, possibly. You've heard that happened already after some farmers demonstrations in some other remits of policy, also on the environmental front. So that may happen. So look at the speed gauge, recalibrate a bit, but carry on in the same direction of travel. I think that's what's going to happen.
Very great analysis, Antonio. Thank you. I would also love to hear from Pernilla and Jérôme on this question, because you both have a huge amount of public affairs expertise. You also have a few EU elections behind you. So tell us, maybe let's start with you, Jérôme. You're based in Brussels. What are the EU bubbles rumors?
Yeah, I wish I had a crystal ball. Could make a lot of money out of it, but no, I mean, it's even after living so many elections and seeing different parliaments or different commissions or different commissioners, it's always very difficult to predict. I mean, who could have predicted some of the main things that happened over the last 10 years? However, we do see some tendencies or some rumors. I mean, first of all, that the EPP candidate von der Leyen is candidate to her own succession, first of all. We also see regularly the polls in member states, but also EU-wide, that are suggesting that there's a political move more towards the right and a bit away from green policies generally. However, I would also caution to take these too seriously and too early, because things can very much change up until June. We saw it, for example, in various member states, such as Spain or others. But I feel that generally, from the temperature that we're seeing among policymakers and stakeholders, that there is a sense of, okay, we have prepared a lot of legislative proposals, but like I said, doing legislation is not an end in itself. We're not looking for overcapacity and production on legislation. I mean, the idea is to now make them work and to actually have an impact and to enforce them. So this is now going to be, I would say, the work of the next commission is to make sure that companies are working with these new sets, that they are implementing them, that the member states are working together, and so on. And I think that will be the critical point. I mean, if you look at the strategic agenda of the upcoming commission, you can see that, of course, due to recent events, security and defense are high on the agenda. Resilience and competitiveness are very important. Energy, the role globally, and enlargement, for example, are quoted in the strategic agenda. So depending on how EU elections happen for the European Parliament and where some of the member states will stand, I think that there will be a bit more focus on these policies. However, it does not mean that sustainability, social and environmental policies will go away. They will continue being developed. We now have to work on all these implementing acts or delegated acts or decrees, however you want to call it. But now, over the next 4 or 5 years, is actually how the real work will happen, and real work will start creating standards, technical requirements, because now we only have the spirit of the laws, but now we will, work on all the details and how to make it work ultimately.
Absolutely, Jerome. Looking forward also to that real work ahead of us. Pernilla, what's your take on this before we go to the Q&A?
Well, we do see an increasing pushback against the Green Deal, and I'd say that as a business, typically we like certainty, predictability, so we would like to see continuation on all this, and also we do fear that this huge opportunity to make the industry more sustainable will then be delayed or lost, and we also. Another drawback, if it doesn't continue as foreseen, another drawback would be that patchwork of legislations on national level. That is not something that we're in favor of. We are very much in favor of the EU. I mean, the whole beauty of the EU is to provide that harmonized approach, and which is a brilliant way also to deliver impact at scale. So we truly hope that this still will be the case after the election.
Beauty of the EU. I love that. Thank you so much. All right, Q&A question time. So thanks so much, first of all, to the panelists, because believe it or not, as they were speaking to us, they've answered 24 questions already in the Q&A. So thank you so much. Feel free to just continue popping questions in there, and then you just receive an individual answer from our panelists. We will take some now as well. So we have one here. How will suppliers globally be affected by such policies beyond having to provide European retailers with data? I'm not sure who would like to take that.
I may take it for starters, and then my fellow panelists will supplement with their experience. And no, this is a very good question. There are actually some other questions related to this. So yes, to clarify and to supplement a bit what I said before, a lot of the initiatives we're launching are what we call product legislation. So they apply to specific products, in this case, textile products, and all products, such products, so textile products that are placed on the EU market need to comply with the requirements we're going to put forward. So the main case, of course, being eco design, but also textile labeling, governing the label attached to the products, the digital label, which we're also thinking of introducing. So all these rules will have to be complied by products no matter where they are produced. So third country producers want to retain the European market, and this is also the strength of the European market, because it's, I think by now we're already the third biggest, but still pretty big. The beauty is that if they want to retain these 450 or 40 million consumers, they need to comply with these rules. So it's not only information that they need to supply to characterize their products. Actually, the production lines need to conform with the characteristics we're going to require of these products, as a minimum at least, but they can aim higher, of course. Then we have other pieces of legislation which are particular to the EU jurisdiction. So these are location legislation, you may call it like that. And this is largely, for example, waste management legislation. So this legislation is about managing waste in the EU. And industrial production legislation, like the industrial emissions legislation, which is about factories located in the EU. So in this case, indeed, these requirements do not have to be complied as such by third country producers located outside. How we're going to control, this is another linked question, how we're going to control incoming products in compliance or not with these requirements. We are very, very much concerned about this. So it's a key part of the level playing field. Rules not only need to be the same for everybody, they need to actually apply to everybody in reality. So not only we have a new market surveillance regulation already up and running, we have specific risk assessment, I would call it like that, rules for market surveillance for eco design. So we will do a risk assessment of products coming in and focusing more on those where non-compliance or even fraud is more likely. But then we also have something which is outside the textiles strategy and package, but we're very excited about, which is the largest reform of customs legislation. And this is an incredible package. I know the implementation will be beyond 2030 most likely, but still, It's all about making sure that products are properly controlled at the border. There will be no more exemptions for products to be controlled at customs, and with a particular eye on the online markets. So we'll be looking at specific ways. We proposed it already. It's in co-decision. Specific ways to control products coming in by sold online. So a very interesting question, and I hope it's clear now. We are very, very, very concerned about the level playing field, and we want to make sure that everybody plays by the same rules, no matter where. Bangladesh, China, no matter where.
Amazing, Antonio. Thank you. I see many questions for the Commission, but we'll give you a break in the meantime. I'll take another one. Maybe for you, Pernilla, we have a question saying, what is the best way for businesses to prepare for the upcoming changes in legislation? As we mentioned since the beginning, H&M Group has many, many years of public affairs expertise behind. So what would be your advices for someone starting in the journey?
Well, it's a bit, I mean, one thing is if you want to do public affairs, but there's another thing if you want to comply with it. And for me, that is two different legs of the same body. And from what I hear in this question, it's more about compliance. How do we do to comply? I think it's important, of course, to understand the legislations. And however, you don't know how the legislation look like until it is past the goal. But it's good to at least to read through and understand which aspects can be hard to implement and which aspects can take long time to implement. For example, it can be on a product to be able to the circular aspects of a product is not something that you change within the business in a week or so. So I think there are a couple of those aspects that you really need to look into and look at on a long term. What would that mean for me as a business? So the compliance part is more looking into what does it mean for us? What do we need to change to be able to comply?
Yeah, no, indeed, you touched upon the big question here, right? Also, as Jérôme was mentioning, we're entering into a new phase in which, implementation and compliance are also at the core, also while new things come again. And just related to that, we have an interesting question that I'm thinking many of you might wonder about. What will be the impact of these in-progress regulations in case Ursula von der Leyen is not elected again? I don't know, maybe Antonio, if you could give us an overview here of which policies would be stopped somehow and which continue?
That was actually the one I thought I had replied before, but maybe not specifically enough. No, the idea, first of all, the expectation is that she is indeed elected again, but democracy being what it is, I stand by what I said. So I think that the general direction of travel will remain the same. Of course, there's always some fine tuning. Of course, there are some initiatives which are very top priority for a certain president and not so much for others, and then new ideas also come in. That's also good and healthy. But as I said, I think the general direction of travel is there, will remain, and especially all these implementing pieces of legislation that are already on the go, such as eco design, for example, because the regulation itself was already adopted. Well, it was not finally adopted; it was provisionally agreed upon. It will be adopted before the summer, but so then before the next commission. So I expect all this implementing legislation to continue more or less as we are envisioning it, also because it's very technical. But this being said, of course, there will be some recalibrating. Yes, indeed.
Perfect. Thank you so much for clarifying that. There's also one question that we see that you already answered in the Q&A, but as the answers are not visible for everyone, maybe you can voice it over. And the question was, are there measures intended to reduce overconsumption?
Yes. So overconsumption is also linked to overproduction. For overproduction, we have a specific initiative for unsold goods, where we was already, it's the same regulation, the eco design regulation introduced a rule to ban the destruction of unsold goods, and we are now working on a delegated act to introduce specific rules on how that will work in practice. How will we foster the reuse of these, and if it comes to that, ultimately the recycling of these unsold products. Regarding overconsumption in general, we feel that it's the whole strategy that will drive overconsumption down. Because if consumers will have, for the first time, access to harmonized, trustworthy characterization of the products, how impactful they are on the environment, and even very good products will always have an impact on the environment, I believe that consumers will start consuming less and will start consuming better. And also we have campaigns, as I mentioned, we have campaigns to try to inform consumers and persuade them of the impact of that textiles has on the environment. A lot of people are not fully aware. I wasn't fully aware until I started working on this. So it's a thing. May I already seize the opportunity and talk about affordability, because there's a question about that, and that's super important. I mean, people fear that by raising the bar, products will become too expensive. We're really looking at that and trying to avoid that as best we can. I mean, obviously there will be some raise in price, but nothing beyond the affordable. This is clear. We'll certainly not foster that, and we don't want that. So we want products to stay affordable. It's actually even specifically written in the legislation. It's a must. It's a requirement. Products need to remain affordable, but they will cost a bit more. And this links to what I was saying in overconsumption, because if they also cost a bit more, maybe people will consume a bit less. But they will also last longer and they'll be better in quality. So, it's a win-win, I think.
Yes, thanks so much indeed. Affordability is also linked and great for addressing that. Well, so many great questions. I would definitely want to take one on Renewcell as well. As most of you know, it filed for bankruptcy, right? A few weeks back. What does it mean for policy and the industry? Who would like to take this one?
I can start, as Antonio has been on the stage for some, but I would love also Antonio to feed in here. I think there are. The question was what it means for.
What it would mean for policy and the industry, policy/industry.
Yes. I mean, there are many different reasons why it failed, and I think, or failed, went in bankruptcy. I think it is clear, to be able to achieve all the legislations that are popping right now, there is a need for more investment and more initiative on circular materials. And I can just say, if it is one of the reasons why it went on bankruptcy or not, I don't know. But one problem there was that the Renewcell factory was based in Sweden, and the product was considered waste. And that is a problem if we want to take that to factories that are outside of the EU. So it is very linked to legislation. And that's also something that we have raised many times with policymakers, that how can we promote a circular industry while cutting the road ahead for them by considering their product as a waste. So I think this is, and that is, we're going into details, but it is in the details that a business will fail or not. So just stop there.
Yes, thank you so much, Pernilla, for touching upon that, also at the forefront of the media attention. For the sake of time, let's move on to another question. Q&A remains open. Feel free to drop more questions on this very important topic in there if needed. I have one question for Jérôme here. Could you please elaborate on those specific challenges faced by the industry players in digesting the regulatory tsunami? And how has FESI addressed these challenges?
I So I think I mean the main issues, first of all, is I would say knowledge, capacity building. Whether you're a big company or an SME, I mean, even for big companies, you would be surprised how their EU government affairs teams were relatively small in resources and size. And so, the huge amount of texts and the complexity of the text that was arriving towards FASY and directly and indirectly towards the membership was a real challenge. It was a real challenge to interpret and understand what to make of it, how to translate it concretely in business terms. And here, of course, what was another challenge is the huge amount of service providers and consultancies that suddenly, rushed towards all the companies, selling them, I would say, a lot of promises in how to implement or how to comply already with legislation. I mean, there are a lot of companies out there saying they're DPP compliant, although DPP is not even really really approved yet, or so I think it's really, first of all, it's the capacity building to understand what will these regulations mean for the companies, for their value chain, for their stakeholders, and how will they need to implement those. How has FASY dealt with this? So we have dealt with this like any industry association. We have a team of EU policy experts based in Brussels who are digesting all the information received, whether orally or doing webinars or workshops and things like that, and trying to explain to the companies and alert them, educate them about what is coming their way. And we do so already years in advance. So usually they know 3-4 years in advance what is coming, how it will look like, and how they can start their journey to adapt and so on. And then we also offer the networking and peer learning aspect, which is very important because, of course, depending on various capacities and interpretations, companies can also help each other. So again, here I would mention that if you're a sports brand, it's very important to be a member of FASY, for example. But if you are any other brand, it's very important to engage with federations or with your peers or in multi-stakeholder initiatives to make sure that you also learn from others. Because again, nobody, whatever the size, can do this on their own. You can even talk to other sectors like the automotive industry or the electronic sector on how they have faced their journey before our industry was in scope.
Thank you so much, Jérôme. Do we have time for one more? It's very tempting to continue. Very, very brief, Antonio. My colleagues are looking at me saying maybe not, but very briefly, because I really think it would be extremely interesting. Can you tell us how the Commission will monitor progress, basically, on the evolution of the adopted legislation on textiles?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as the others are. Indeed, I mean it's part actually of our mantra and even our rules, internal rules, to keep revising everything we do in a cycle. So once legislation is adopted and all the rules for implementation are produced by the Commission itself, we immediately start checking how implementation is on the ground and thinking what needs to be revised, what needs to be supplemented. In this case, it's actually even more important than usual because as we've said here, it's a sector that hasn't been regulated specifically before. We are the first to do it in the world. It is a technically complex endeavor. So inevitably, we will start small. And this is something that should reassure companies as well. We will start with as we say, the low-hanging fruit, where we have the most standards, where we can have the most beneficial impact on the environment. This is where we start. And this is, by the way, why we're starting with apparel, with clothing, garments, and clothing accessories, and not the technical textiles that someone asked. We will consider those in the future, but not for now, as it looks likely. It hasn't been decided, but it looks like for now, we're focusing just on apparel. So it's even more important to keep revising what we're doing, because as time passes, we need to check if we're doing things right, then fine tune and correct what we're not doing right, and above all, supplement what we're doing, branching out to other subgroups of products, technical textiles being one, footwear being another, leather, all the leather products, fur, but crucially also expanding the number of product aspects that we will introduce requirements for in this first delegated act for eco design. I didn't go into this level of detail, but let me just tell you very quickly, there's a list of eco design product aspects, which is essentially durability, recyclability, recycled content, and so on. We shall focus on some and not all, and then in the future we will look into the others. So yes, we will take very close look at how legislation is being implemented in order to revise it and to supplement it, indeed.
Thank you so much, Antonio. Now I really need to stop. So first of all, big thank you from us to you for being here. So many interesting ideas, right? Many ideas that came back. We've heard about this togetherness, this working together as an industry with multi-stakeholder initiatives, with peers, etc. Also about that magic combination between industry working hand in hand with policymakers. We know that the 3-4 years will be a lot about implementation, but there's new things coming as well. So thanks so much, Antonio, also for already bringing those here. We have a part 2 coming after the summer, so this is not the end from us either. But I will pass it on to my colleague Christina again, so that she can tell us more about next steps. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, panelists. And also thank you, attendees. I mean, this is the 10th masterclass that we are hosting. And I've never seen that many questions before. So very appreciating that you are so engaged. I just have a couple of slides that we want to show you. The first thing is our newest project at GFA, that is the Trailblazer program. Right now, we are looking for early stage innovations, and Marie-Louise and team touched upon the renewal cell case. So this specific project really calls out for early stage innovations who can apply, because there'll be an equity investment for the winner, up to $200,000. So really interesting. There'll be a link in the chat for it if you know anyone out there, or if you are an innovator yourself that you want to apply to this program. Also, from our GFA office here in Copenhagen, we would love if you guys want to fill out the fashion industry target consultation survey, so we can measure progress in the industry. It's very important, and there's also a link in the chat for that. Last but not least, second last thing, the summit is coming up. It's two months away. It's our 15 years anniversary. We'd love for you guys to be there. Tickets can be bought online. And as Marie-Louise just said, the next masterclass, Unpacking Policy, will be election reflection, taking place 3rd September, same time as this. So with that being said, I'm going to thank you, everyone, for being here, both panelists and also all attendees. With that, this session will be online tomorrow at GFA's website.